Nephilim. Were they truly the hybrid offspring of angels and humans? Part 1. The Opening. Sowing the Seed of Mystery. Welcome, seekers of ancient truths, to a realm illuminated not by the harsh glare of modernity, but by the flickering embrace of candlelight. In these hallowed shadows, we embark on a journey into the deepest recesses of sacred texts, where whispers of an antediluvian world beckon us. Tonight, we confront a question that has haunted theologians and mystified believers for millennia. Who or what were the Nephilim? Were they merely giants, born of earthly lineage, or something far more extraordinary, a profound and unsettling anomaly that forever altered the course of human history? Prepare yourselves, for we are about to peel back the layers of myth and mystery, to unearth the forgotten narratives that challenge our very understanding of the divine and the human. We promise to venture beyond superficial interpretations, to confront the profound implications of these enigmatic figures, and to explore whether they were, indeed, the hybrid offspring of angels and humans. Part 2. The Body. The Journey of Deep Discovery. A. The historical and cultural context. Echoes from a pre-flood world. To truly grasp the enigma of the Nephilim, we must first transport ourselves back to a world vastly different from our own, a world shrouded in the mists of antiquity, a time before the Great Flood cleansed the earth. The primary biblical mention of the Nephilim appears in Genesis 6:1-4, a passage pregnant with profound implications, yet frustratingly brief. This narrative unfolds during a period marked by escalating wickedness and moral decay, a time when the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 6-5. It is against this backdrop of pervasive corruption that the mysterious sons of God make their appearance, an event that seems to precipitate an even greater descent into depravity, culminating in the divine decision to unleash a global deluge. Understanding the worldview of ancient Near Eastern cultures is also crucial. These societies often grappled with the boundaries between the divine and the human, frequently populating their mythologies with demigods, heroes, and monstrous beings born of divine mortal unions. While we must be careful not to conflate biblical narratives with pagan myths, this cultural context reveals that the concept of a blurred line between celestial and terrestrial was not entirely alien to the ancient mind. The Genesis account, however, presents this not as a heroic saga, but as a transgression, a corruption that demands a divine response, setting it apart from its contemporary cultural echoes. B. Decoding the Scripture and the Evidence. Unpacking Genesis 6. The pivotal passage, Genesis 6:1-4, reads, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." The core of the controversy lies in the interpretation of two key phrases: sons of God bini haya, Elim bini hai, and Nephilim. The phrase sons of God has historically been interpreted in two primary ways. The first, and arguably the most provocative, posits that these sons of God were indeed divine or angelic beings. Supporters of this view point to other biblical passages where sons of God clearly refers to angels. For example, Job 1-6, 2-1, 38-7. If this interpretation holds, then the act of these celestial beings taking human wives and procreating would represent a profound violation of divine order, an unnatural union that birthed a corrupted lineage. The progeny of this union are then explicitly identified as the Nephilim. The second major interpretation suggests that sons of God refers to the righteous lineage of Seth, while daughters of man refers to the unrighteous lineage of Cain. In this view, The sons of God marrying the daughters of man represents a spiritual compromise, a mixing of the holy and the profane, leading to further moral decline. The Nephilim, in this context, would then be powerful, tyrannical individuals born of this morally compromised union, perhaps simply giants or mighty warriors, but not necessarily of supernatural parentage in the literal sense. However, this interpretation often struggles to fully account for the extraordinary nature implied by the text, especially the idea of the Nephilim already being on the earth in those days in their description as mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The term Nephilim itself is equally enigmatic. Derived from the Hebrew root naphal, meaning to fall, it is often translated as fallen ones or giants. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, translates Nephilim as gigantes, further reinforcing the idea of immense stature. This association with giants is reinforced in Numbers 13:33, where the Israelite spies report seeing the Nephilim, or their descendants, the Anakim, in Canaan, terrifying them with their size. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. This later mention suggests that their lineage, or at least the memory and fear of them, persisted even after the flood. C. The hidden theological meaning, a profound corruption. If we lean into the interpretation of the sons of God as angelic beings, the theological implications of the Nephilim are profound and disturbing. This narrative speaks to an unprecedented act of spiritual rebellion and a deep corruption of God's created order. It suggests that angelic beings, created to serve and glorify God, descended and transgressed their divine boundaries, directly interfering with humanity's trajectory in a physically destructive manner. This was not merely a moral failing, but a cosmic transgression, a deliberate defilement of the human race, which God had deemed very good. The presence of the Nephilim, these hybrid giants, becomes a tangible manifestation of this profound corruption. They represent a perversion of life itself, a lineage born not of God's design, but of rebellion and unnatural union. This explains, in part, the severity of God's judgment in the flood. The world was not just morally wicked, it was biologically and spiritually defiled by the presence of these unnatural beings, threatening the very purity of the human line through which the Messiah would eventually come. It speaks to a cosmic battle where forces of evil actively sought to thwart God's plan for humanity and creation. Moreover, this narrative underscores the sanctity of creation and the boundaries established by God. The mingling of divine and human, outside of God's specific design as seen in the incarnation of Christ, a divine act of pure love and redemption, is depicted as an act of defiance with catastrophic consequences. It highlights God's sovereignty and his unwavering commitment to restoring and preserving his creation, even if it requires radical intervention. D. Controversies and theories. A spectrum of interpretation. The Nephilim narrative has been a fertile ground for theological debate and imaginative speculation across centuries. The angel-human hybrid theory, the traditional view. This view, prominent in early Jewish literature, like the Book of Enoch, which we touched upon in a previous episode, and held by many early church fathers, such as Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian, takes Genesis 6 literally. It asserts that fallen angels sexually cohabited with human women, producing the Nephilim. This interpretation connects the narrative to the broader theme of angelic rebellion and the origins of evil on earth. It finds support in the consistency of the sons of God terminology in other biblical texts referring to angels, and in the sheer strangeness of the account if simply referring to ordinary human intermarriage. The Sethite line theory. Popularized by figures like Augustine of Hippo, this view interprets sons of God as the righteous descendants of Seth, who maintained a spiritual devotion to God, and daughters of man as the ungodly descendants of Cain. The Nephilim, then, are seen as the offspring of this intermarriage, not literally supernatural, but exceptionally powerful and wicked individuals who contributed to the world's corruption. Proponents argue This avoids the theological difficulties of angels having physical bodies and procreating, aligning the narrative more with human moral failings. However, this interpretation often struggles to explain the unique terminology and the seemingly extraordinary nature attributed to the Nephilim. The royal dynasties theory, a more modern academic theory, suggests that sons of God refers to powerful kings or tyrannical rulers of ancient times who practiced polygamy and amassed harems, asserting their divine right to rule and taking whomever they pleased. The Nephilim, in this context, would be their powerful, renowned offspring, perhaps literal giants due to advantageous nutrition or genetics, or simply metaphorically giants in terms of power and influence. This view attempts to ground the narrative in known historical social structures, but might downplay the supernatural elements strongly implied by the text. The demonic oppression theory. Another perspective posits that sons of God might refer to humans possessed or heavily influenced by demonic entities, leading to extreme wickedness and the birth of unusually strong or oppressive individuals. This avoids literal angelic procreation, but still implicates supernatural forces in the corruption of humanity. Each theory grapples with the brevity of the Genesis text and attempts to reconcile it with broader theological frameworks and scientific understanding. The challenge lies in respecting the text's ancient context while seeking its enduring meaning for us today. The very fact of these diverse interpretations underscores the enduring power and elusive nature of the Nephilim. Part 3. The conclusion, the eternal echo. We have journeyed through the cryptic verses of Genesis, navigated the treacherous waters of interpretation, and confronted the formidable presence of the Nephilim. Whether understood as literal angelic human hybrids or as the powerful, corrupted offspring of morally compromised lineages, their narrative remains a potent testament to the fragile boundaries between the sacred and the profane, the divine and the human. They stand as a stark reminder of the profound consequences that can arise when these boundaries are transgressed, whether by celestial beings or by humanity itself through its choices. The story of the Nephilim, therefore, is not merely an ancient curiosity, it is an eternal echo. It compels us to ponder the pervasive nature of evil, the delicate balance of creation, and the unwavering resolve of a God who, despite the deepest corruptions, always seeks to redeem and restore. What does it mean for us, then, to exist in a world still grappling with unseen forces and profound moral choices? How do we uphold the sacred boundaries in our own lives, discerning between the divine will and the temptations that seek to corrupt? The Nephilim, these forgotten giants of old, continue to stand as silent sentinels, inviting us to look deeper into the grand, unfolding drama of salvation and to consider our place within its eternal narrative.